We know to offer will start in just a few minutes. I could invite everyone sitting on the second round of tables to move in. Maybe. Yes, ma'am. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon event on fostering opportunities for cooperation on sustainable agriculture and trade with after the colon. So how do we get there? So the idea of this event today is to provide an opportunity really to take stock. What's working, what is not, and where are there opportunities to foster cooperation that would work to bolster sustainability in agricultural trade, and that would foster or achieve real, lasting, positive impacts in terms of sustainable development in all three of its dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. So huge questions. But I think we have a great group of speakers and a great group of experts also from governments here to help us in that conversation today. Just before we begin, let me start by thanking my colleagues from Geneva Trade Platform and Dimitri for the collaboration on this event today, and to my own team at TESS for making this happen. For those who don't know me, my name is Carolyn Birkbeck. I'm the Executive Director of TESS, the Forum on Trade, Environment and SDGs. We were launched here at the Geneva Graduate Institute just around 4 years ago with the aim of fostering a trading system that addresses the triple environmental crises that we faced, while at the same time advancing sustainable development priorities. So the starting point for our work and the conversation today is that achieving greater sustainability in trade will require inclusive international cooperation. Easier to say than to achieve. So this is one of our core challenges, and really where we want to put the spotlight today. There's been a lot of talk for really decades on the importance of fostering greater sustainability in agricultural trade, but we have not got to the point we need to. So we also know that agriculture has long been recognized as one of the most challenging sectors for trade cooperation in general. Sustainability issues aside, it's been one of the ones where we had the greatest tensions, and governments have faced the greatest challenges in making progress. that over the past several years, we've had recognition across a range of international processes of the importance of greater sustainability in agricultural trade on issues ranging from food security and nutrition to sustainable livelihoods, sustainable production and consumption, reduction of food waste, reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions footprint of agriculture, and also deforestation. So alongside, there's been increasing attention to a range of different trade policy tools or pathways for cooperation that could be pursued, from cooperation around environmentally harmful agricultural subsidies to voluntary standards and government requirements. So there's a lot of ideas on the table. There are a lot of initiatives that are being explored. I think it would be fair to say that this hasn't yet reached the scale at the speed required to really ensure sustainability in the agricultural sector. So this is the situation that we're trying to grapple with today. We have, as I mentioned, a packed agenda, and we're hoping that our speakers will offer thoughts and ideas about ways forward and prospects for cooperation in a range of different areas, but particularly on fostering sustainable agricultural production, consumption and trade, ending environmentally harmful ag subsidies, ensuring policy coherence between development, environment and trade objectives, and also promoting food, nutrition and livelihood security. So of course, that's just like the whole thing that many of you here have been working on for your whole career, and we'll try to wrap that up in the next less than 90 minutes. But first we'll hear from, for around 6 minutes each, from a set of experts. You have them on the agenda. We have Pinar Karakaya, who is economist at the FAO, Doaa Abdel-Motaal, who is senior counselor in the agricultural division at the World Trade Organization, my colleague Christophe Bellmann, who's head of policy analysis at TESS, Emeline Fellus, who is the Director of Food Reform for Sustainability and Health at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And online, we have Xiaotian Fu, who is Food and Natural Resources Program Director at World Resources Institute in China. And then we'll have reflections from representatives of 5 delegations. In the interest of moving us forward, I won't introduce them all by name now. I'll do that in the second segment, but we have representatives with us from Brazil, Ecuador, the European Union, the Philippines, and the United Kingdom. So just before turning to the first of our panelists, Pinar, I wanted to say that I think we have in this room and also online with us a great resource of experts who've been working on these issues for a long time. So I'm hoping that this will be really seen as a sort of a conversation among all of you rather than a long, boring series of presentations. There will be presentations, but these will be very insightful, I promise. But the idea is that we will have half an hour at the end where we could have a more active exchange. So with no further ado, I turn to Pinar, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to first thank the TESS team for the kind invitation on this very important, timely, and equally challenging topic. I would like to start my intervention with the latest figures on food security, which some of you might already know. According to the latest report released by FAO, IFAD, UNICEF, WFP, and WHO at the end of July, which is known as the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2025, estimated 8.2% of the global population, amounting to around 673 million people, experienced hunger in 2024. 512 million people is expected to still face hunger by 2030. While progress was witnessed in 2024 when compared to previous years, unfortunately, the improvement was uneven across the globe, and the estimates still remain above pre-COVID pandemic levels. These figures, unfortunately, highlight the challenge of achieving SDG 2. On the other hand, they also underscore the critical importance of working together. While conflicts, wars, weather extremes, and economic downturns remain to be the major drivers of food security globally, today our agri-food systems also face multifaceted challenges, further deteriorating the global food security situation. To name a few: growing world population with urbanization, greenhouse gas emissions, soil degradation, and water scarcity, amongst others. The situation stresses the urgency to work together. It also emphasizes the need for transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems, leaving no one behind, and contributing to all 4 pillars of food security and the 3 dimensions of sustainability. As recognized in the Sustainable Development Agenda, trade is an integral part of our agri-food systems. It improves economic access to food for the most vulnerable populations by bringing down prices and reducing costs to consumers, and allow for enough food to be available all year around. Oops, sorry. Let me refer to some figures here. Food and agriculture trade has increased significantly over the last 2 decades, an increase of 5-fold, reaching to $2.1 trillion in 2023, and the energy it carried more than doubled during the same period. However, while trade can play a role in contributing to the transformation of sustainable agri-food systems, it has also the potential to lead to various trade-offs like any economic activity. While increased food trade through trade liberalization can raise farm incomes by expanding exports and resulting in productivity gains, increasing competition in import competing sectors can lead to income losses. Or while rising incomes from exports may foster social outcomes and can lead to better and diverse diets, trade can also contribute to rising inequalities within countries. Or while trade can play a role in both adaptation and mitigation to climate change, production for exports can result in negative environmental impacts. To maximize the positive impacts of trade, appropriate efforts and comprehensive policies are therefore needed, including at international level, to promote inclusive and equitable growth while strengthening the resilience and sustainability of our agri-food systems. To name a few, market transparency is critical in making informed policy decisions and reducing market disruptions and volatility. Trade facilitating measures can make trade work best for sustainable food systems through digital technologies. In the meantime, trade and domestic policies need to be reoriented and accommodate targets like fostering sustainability and resilience. And moreover, programs promoting productivity, such as research and development, programs promoting access to high quality inputs, improving access to financial tools are also equally important. With this background, I would like to note that coordinated action and strengthened global cooperation and governance are crucial to achieve a food secure and sustainable world. Let me give some examples of collaborative efforts to which FAO has been providing support as well. I would like to start by underscoring the significance of ensuring a fair, transparent, predictable, and non-discriminatory multilateral trading system. This has been consistently highlighted by the FAO members for promoting agricultural and rural development and contributing to achieving food security and improved nutrition for all. Second, I would like to refer to the role of market transparency. Market transparency and timely information, in particular in view of the increasing number of risks and uncertainties, are critical. An important example of a collaborative effort to this end is the G20 Agricultural Market Information System. As you might know, established following the 2007-2008 food price crisis, AMIS is an interagency platform playing a positive role in reducing price volatility and promoting coordinated policy action. Third, I would like to refer to the importance of digitalization and trade facilitation and give the ePhyto solution example developed by the International Plant Protection Convention as an example. This is a flagship example of how digital transformation is reshaping agricultural trade. The system today is used in more than 90 countries, and by replacing paper-based phytosanitary certificates with an electronic system, it promotes safer, cheaper, faster, and greener trade. Here, I would like to open a parenthesis. During the public forum week, as FAO, we are going to organize a session on ePhyto solution on the 17th of September. If you would like to learn more about this initiative, please feel free to join the session. Furthermore, I would like to mention trade agreements as important pathways to foster cooperation for sustainable production and trade. Recently, as we know, as some of us know, trade agreements have been pursuing deeper integration by including broader policy areas such as environmental issues. FAO has been conducting a project with the support of the Swiss government, which analyzes the environment-related provisions associated with agriculture, forestry, and fisheries sectors and their impact on environmental outcomes. The findings highlight that there is a significant reduction in agriculture-related greenhouse gas emissions in countries having more agriculture-related environmental provisions in their regional trade agreements. Of course, while unilateral or regional actions might not be effective on global externalities and in its entirety, regional trade agreements can enable cooperation and feed into the global and multilateral context. Lastly, as we always hear from the experts and policy actors, I would like to underscore the importance of dialogue amongst governments, international organizations, civil society, private sector, and academia, and ensuring coherence amongst the policy actions. While concluding, I would also like to note that the effectiveness of policies depends on the location, context, and conditions in which it is implemented. Therefore, a holistic approach is needed when it comes to the necessary reforms and actions to foster sustainable production and trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pinar. Really useful reflection on the range of lessons also from FAO's long engagement on these topics. So we're now going to turn to Doaa, who I think can also give us a reflection on what this looks like from the WTO context, and hopefully you can see some glimmers of light for us as well.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having invited me to be part of this panel. So there's nothing, I think, more controversial in the WTO than to say agricultural trade and sustainability in the same sentence. There's tremendous fear, not just amongst a number of delegations, but also amongst members of the private sector, and I meet with them frequently, about the WTO engaging in sustainability discussions in relation to agricultural trade. There's this perception that when agricultural trade meets sustainability, it will give rise to all sorts of new non-tariff barriers to trade. So a lot of members of the private sector and some countries, when they see that intersection, all they think about is new obstacles to trade. I think that there are two ways to look at agricultural trade and sustainability, and I would say that there are two buckets, let's say, of issues or of intersections between the two issues. In the first bucket, I would put the measures that improve sustainability and that reduce barriers to trade, because these do exist. And I think it is a bit of a shame that when we talk about agricultural trade and sustainability, we go into alarm mode. We tend to go into alarm mode in the WTO because there are a lot of opportunities for achieving sustainability and reducing barriers to trade. And that's sustainability bucket number one, I would say. And then there's sustainability bucket number two, which can lead to more barriers if that takes the shape of more standards for the way products are produced or for the way the end product must look. So I think that there are two possibilities here: sustainability that reduces barriers to trade and sustainability that increases barriers to trade. And the one that does increase barriers to trade may very well be justified. But I just think in terms of sort of addressing the gut reaction and the fear that people have, it's important to remember that there is a sustainability bucket number one. And in that sustainability bucket number one, I would put the entire fish subsidies negotiations of the WTO, where the WTO has succeeded in concluding a fisheries subsidies agreement that will phase out environmentally harmful subsidies. So it's an agreement that achieves two goals, I would say. One, for the trading system, of eliminating a major distortion to trade in fish, which is also food and an agricultural product, not under the WTO agreement on agriculture, but an agricultural product in most people's minds. And that achieves an environmental goal because it does remove a subsidy that, you know, as the saying goes, leads to too many fishermen chasing after too few fish. So that's the biggest example of sustainability bucket number one, where we can achieve two goals at the same time and where we need not cringe at the idea of agricultural trade meeting sustainability. But other examples include the environmental goods negotiations, which, you know, have yet to deliver, but that would be a negotiation negotiation that would accelerate trade opening in products that are helpful for the environment, including for agricultural trade. So that's point number one that I wanted to make, which is that it's important to realize that sustainability does not just mean barriers to trade in a trade context. The second point I wanted to make is that it's important to keep the big picture in mind, which is that open trade itself is the biggest contributor to agricultural sustainability. The core business of the WTO, without creating an additional sustainability agenda, delivers sustainability. Why so? Because an agricultural product is nothing other than embodied land, energy, and water. The more you make trade in that embodied land, energy, and water more efficient, the more you're making natural resource use more efficient around the globe. So that's something to pay attention to. Food must travel because land is scarce in some parts of the world, and the embodied land must travel. Water is scarce in some parts of the world. My country, Egypt, I'll take it as an example, where the United Nations Development Program has told us multiple times that we would need 3 river Niles, not 1, if we were to aim for food self-sufficiency. So water must travel and energy must travel. So really, we have to get on with the core business of a WTO, of opening markets, and to remember that sustainability is embodied in that. We can create an additional sustainability agenda to talk about other things if we want, but let's just remember that the core business is really what will deliver. And this, takes me to the flip side of that argument where, for example, at the UN Food Systems Summit, there was a lot of discussion about buy local, localization, 0 kilometers, 0 miles, 0 this, 0 that. In reality, that is not good news for the environment. A lot of local products, if you want to buy your agricultural products locally, you might be hurting the environment. If you're pushing the environment too hard on something that it doesn't have, you're asking it to deliver food from an energy-intensive greenhouse because you're in a place where the sun doesn't shine, it may be better to import that food. And there are so many studies now that I think have been produced that make that point, and we can go into that in the Q&A. And my final point, and then I'll close, is on the WTO dispute settlement system, which unfortunately has now is no longer functioning the way it used to before, with the appellate body part of the system having now been, let's say, suspended. The dispute settlement process of the WTO is key to delivering not just on trade goals in the WTO rulebook, but to delivering on environmental goals, because the WTO's fundamental principles of consistency, non-discrimination, transparency ensure the veracity of the environmental goal. So a properly functioning WTO dispute settlement mechanism in the event of trade and environment disputes ensures that the environmental measures that are at play and that are disputed in the WTO are truly there to achieve their environmental objectives. And I'll close here. In the Q&A, I'd be happy to give examples of how the dispute settlement system is delivered for both trade and the environment in the past and more recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doaa, for that perspective. So I'm now going to turn to Christophe, please.
Thanks a lot, Carolyn. And what I'll do is focus on, I guess, your bucket number 1, which is about the issue of environmentally harmful agriculture subsidies. And what I thought I would do is maybe just share with you some of the findings of an expert group that TESS put together some months ago, and basically ask a set of experts, how can we identify and start tackling environmentally harmful agriculture subsidies? So overall, we all know that a significant part of agriculture support relies on policy instruments that not only distort production and trade, but also tends to generate increased greenhouse gas emissions or other environmental damages. While the existing rules in the WTO kind of encourage a shift towards forms of support that are less or at most minimally trade distorting, they're not really designed to specifically constrain the subsidies that have negative environmental effect, as was envisaged, for example, under Target 18 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We know from the literature that essentially market price support, payment based on outputs, and input subsidies are potentially the most harmful also from an environmental perspective, not least because they're linked to production, so they tend to increase production. But at the same time, I think it's very clear in the literature that the environmental impact of a particular subsidy scheme is highly context specific. And to further complicate the equation, we know that individual programs often come with trade-offs between different environmental objectives, between environmental objectives and broader public policy goals, such as rural development, food or livelihood security. So striking that balance also makes it quite complicated. So in other words, really identifying kind of ex ante the environmental effect of a particular form of support will require a bit more granular approach and analysis, and that in a way that what we're trying to do with this expert group, and basically what the report of that expert group suggests a series of different options that can be combined or used to define ex ante what would be environmentally harmful subsidies. And there are different approaches. First approach is simply to enhance transparency and notification, not only of the subsidies themselves, but also of their environmental impacts that are associated with these subsidies using some kind of standardized requirements. That would not be an ex ante analysis, would be more like an ex post kind of assessment of the environmental impacts, but at least it would provide some additional information that over time will help adjust the programs. A second approach is to focus on certain commodities or sectors that are particularly associated with environmental concerns. So it could be the most emission-intensive commodities, such as ruminant livestock, or commodities that are associated with other environmental challenges, being biodiversity loss, water scarcity, and so on and so forth. The problem with that approach is that it does not really reflect the wide differences, for example, in emissions intensities that you find across regions for the same kind of commodity or for the same product. So depending really on the types of farming practices and production methods, you will end up with very completely different solutions. So another approach that was suggested is to subsidies. And you can do it either by kind of singling out farming practices that are associated with positive environmental impacts, or by trying to list those that are particularly harmful for the environment. And an example that exists, for example, is what the European Commission has been doing through this metadata analysis of farming practices, trying to identify some of the good farming practices from an environmental perspective. Now, of course, a challenge with that approach is the need to establish some kind of a shared understanding of what could be considered good or bad farming practices. And that, of course, will require a lot of discussion. An additional option, and I think that's also maybe getting a bit of inspiration from the fisheries discussion, is this idea of a kind of rebuttable presumption. So under that approach, you would basically define a core set of subsidies that would be deemed to be environmentally harmful unless the country that subsidizes can demonstrate that the scheme in question is not generating the type of negative environmental impact that is usually associated with those subsidies. And that would allow to take into account different design elements, flanking measures, cross-compliance requirements that may not always be incorporated in the kind of ex-ante type of typology. Of course, here the challenge would be to what should be demonstrated and how, and that's of course something that would be subject to discussion. And maybe in addition to all these different options, I think there was a very strong feeling among the expert group that whatever approach is taken, you will need to combine that with different types of flexibilities, maybe for countries at different levels of development. Small producers, low-income, resource-poor farmers, those that are responsible for a very small share of a particular environmental problem. And finally, just maybe a couple of words about moving cooperation in this area. So obviously, unilateral or autonomous reform is probably what is going to really lead to the reduction of environmentally harmful subsidies. But there's also a need for cooperation, not only to reach global targets, to avoid problems of leakage that might occur, to avoid free rider problems, to put peer pressure. So there's a very strong case for cooperation in this area, and that can take very different forms. New rules, probably unlikely in the current environment, but things like enhanced transparency on the sustainability dimension of particular support scheme based on kind of standardized reporting requirements and regular peer review is something that could be done as an option. More advanced form of cooperation could include also developing some kind of collective soft law approaches, such as non-binding guidance for the design of subsidy schemes, voluntary pledges. So there's a wide range of issues that one can explore in this area. And finally, I think an important aspect in this discussion is really to connect the dots between a lot of discussions and processes that are taking place at different levels, be it in the context of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the work in the WTO, the OECD has been doing quite a lot of work, the G20, and so on and so forth. So connecting the dots between these different things is probably something that would be quite important. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christophe, for taking us on a dive into one of the key issues on the trade and sustainable agriculture agenda, and one that's been tricky for quite some time to work out how to take forward. So I'm now pleased to thank you, Christophe. I'm now pleased to turn to the last of our panelists, Emeline, who will focus on some of the issues for cooperation around standards and regulations. Over to you.
Thank you. Am I allowed to reply to a few comments that were made before?
Sure.
I think that would be also great. I'll keep to 5 minutes. No, yes. No, but it was super inspiring. Thank you, everyone, for presenting your findings and your thoughts as well. I wanted, as a segue to my presentation, so to actually rebound on what you presented, Christophe, I think there is another way, which is what we're starting to focus on now. Having spent 25 years now in the field of sustainable agriculture, is that we've made often the mistake to prescribe practices and to focus on practices and to actually focus the subsidies in terms of what practice is being used, as opposed to the outcomes. And increasingly, what we're starting to do in WBCSD is to align different stakeholders. We started with the business, but hopefully we can bring this to another level now, bringing also governments and others, as to what are the core outcomes that everybody agrees to in terms of what agriculture needs to produce. It has to do with food security and nutrition, and often this nutrition angle is still forgotten too much, but it's starting to become much more at the center of the discussions. So it's not just the how you produce, but what you produce, by the way, and that's a really important topic. But leaving this aside, the how you produce it is delivering the food that is needed, but it's within planetary boundaries, and it's delivering the livelihoods of the farmers and the communities. Can we all agree to a few of these outcomes that we are after? Thereafter, it's much easier, I know it's not an easy task, but it's much easier to agree as to whether a subsidy is conducive to a more sustainable system or not. So for us, this is huge. So we've aligned 1,100 businesses now on 11 key outcomes of regenerative agriculture. Everybody now in the business is using that. So it's about water, nature, farmer livelihoods, about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, about soil health, and a few others. Once you have that, what you need is to be able to show that any change you're making delivers on the outcomes. And that's the area where I can see collaboration and cooperation, where you can try to link much better the producers, the smallholder farmers, all the way to, let's say, the carbon markets, or whichever other user is actually keen to really change the way it's being produced. So that's my first remark, is really a plea to focus on outcomes. It's not that easy to measure an outcome, but a practice, as you said, so is going to have such different impacts depending on the area. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that, and it's just adding another layer of complexity, but looking at agriculture is interesting and can unlock a number of solutions. But further than that, we need to look at landscape approach. Because, so I saw somebody frown here. So I'll take a concrete example. In my earlier life, when I was working in side platform with a lot of companies, we were facilitating a project in Spain, looking at how can we have strawberry production that is more sustainable. So if you think about your value chain and just strawberries, everybody can work together along the supply chain and say, oh, I'm going to finance the farmers to use drip irrigation so that they use less water. Or I'm going to give them, the training so that they can plow less or whatever. But the issue is that overall, there is too many farms, there is too much pumping the water as is there, that all of the reserves of water and all of the, Ramsar convention sites are being pumped out. And so the sustainability of the area is reducing because you're not thinking landscape, i.e. the other sectors and what is happening. So that's another layer, but just to say that if you only focus on agriculture, another example, since we have a gentleman from Brazil here, is how important it is that we find ways to pay for the maintenance of the forest, because otherwise we turn entirely the climate into a different climate, where ultimately you won't be able to grow anything. So that concept of also finding ways to subsidize or remove the negative subsidies that support a landscape approach is also going to be an interesting one. So I was just trying to trigger a bit of further thinking.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Emeline. Very useful comments, and nice to link the speakers together. So look, I think we can now turn directly to our, I think she's not joining us online. We did have another speaker, but I think there's been a connection problem. So I'll just move directly to we have 5 reflections from different delegations. I think this will be really interesting as well. So I'm just going to introduce all of them first. So I'm going to have Diego Alfieri, who was the second secretary at the Brazil mission to the WTO, followed by Luis Oña, who is first secretary at the permanent mission of Ecuador to the WTO. Then Julio Menato, who is from the permanent mission of the European Union. Also to the WTO, Malito Cabunos, who is assistant agriculture attaché at the mission of the Philippines to the WTO, and then Aurore Dupin, who is first secretary of agriculture at the permanent mission of the UK to the UN office here in Geneva. So a really diverse group of speakers. We're very grateful for all of you for coming and look forward to your perspectives. I guess you are all really here you've had more of a perspective of those who are able to stand back a little bit from the particular national interests and intense history that I think Doaa referred to also of these negotiations at the WTO. But hopefully you can all offer fresh perspectives and help us understand how these issues look from where you sit. And I think most critically, where you see some of the pathways forward. I think that's where we really want to move the discussion to today. So with that, I'm going to turn first to Diego, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and for TESS and for organizing this event and inviting me here. I will focus a little bit my intervention on the idea of policy coherence, because I do believe that this is how we can, it's a condition for us to achieve food and nutritional security. It's also a condition for us to adopt the necessary measures to foster sustainable agriculture. The first remark that I would like to make is that all of these policies that we are discussing, trade measures, support measures, they do need to comply with international agreements in different areas that we have. So trade here at the WTO, environment, climate, and other related international agreements. I think one thing that I have noticed is that there is some sort of reverse forum shopping. Because when you try to tackle some trade-related or environmental-related measures at the WTO, some people will say these are climate or environmental measures. When you get to the COP or to Bonn, they will say these are trade measures, and you never discuss them exactly. A second remark is when I talk about these policies, these trade measures they need to comply with, I think it's really a matter of finding the right balance between the right to regulate and also the commitments, the principles and obligations that are established in these international agreements. I think we cannot think that this discussion that we are having will forever be an exception to international law, just because, of course, we are trying to tackle something that is very important. But it's not an exception to the rule. We cannot also be trying to do this fully unilaterally, trying to sometimes with this unilateralism, the problem is when you try to impose some production methods to others. And we have seen that it's what Christophe has said about the context, the specificity of all of this discussion that we have. And it's also not, this is not just a way to say that that usual rant on there's no one size fits all. It's more a recognition that positive results can come from different approaches, but also these results, they need to be data-based and evidence-based, science-based. There's a discussion here. We can demonstrate that these positive results arise from different approaches, and then we can start. And I do agree with Emeline. We need to have an objectives and results approach, not really a method or process of production approach. And in the end, this is how we will also be creating this necessary opportunity, fostering sustainable agriculture, creating some incentives and opportunities in the international fora, in the WTO, multilateral trading system, to the domestic producers, so that they receive the necessary signs that if they do produce some way, if they are generating the positive results from these methods of production that are context specific, but they are you can demonstrate, they will adopt these practices. And just to finish, a final remark is that Brazil, not only a personal position, but I think most of you know, we do believe the WTO is a place for us to have these discussions, to move forward. We cannot leave agriculture behind again if we are entering a new era of discussions on international trade and policies. We are looking to many new topics that are rising, members bringing. We cannot leave agriculture behind. We need to find these common denominators, find the opportunities. And of course, I think the most challenging is it's also organizing all of this information and materials that are being produced all over. Today we are here, the FAO has a presentation. Tomorrow, next week, Brazil is organizing a workshop at the WTO. We need to start building on that, connecting the dots. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diego. It reminds me of a session we had earlier today where there was an emphasis on the need to provide evidence on how focusing on sustainability in all its dimensions is something that can help over time diminish uncertainty and support sort of prosperity, however one defines that. And I think here it was interesting just to hear you get on the idea of sort of, let's look at what are some of the positive results that can come from different approaches that countries may have, and also from addressing the sustainability issues. So now I'm going to turn to Luis, please.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, TESS, for organizing this event and for the invitation. Happy to share with you some initiatives, national initiatives, personal thoughts, but most important, some challenges that we find it. So for Ecuador, as many developing countries, agriculture is not just about trade, but it's about people, livelihoods, and protecting our environment. Products like bananas, cocoa, and coffee sustain millions of families and are the backbone of our agro-industrial development. Just putting this in numbers, 1 of every 3 employed people works in the agriculture sector. So when we would talk about sustainability, we mean balance, economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. For us, it's very important to approaching sustainable production and trade. So in this line, Ecuador is committed to promoting sustainable and competitive agro-industrial chains. Just to mention a couple of initiatives, we have our national agribusiness strategy and bioeconomic strategy, which guide us in building value chains that are inclusive and climate smart. For instance, just to mention some figures, Ecuador is the first exporter of banana in the world and the 3rd largest cocoa producer globally. These 2 products, for example, are among the top 5 products of our non-oil exports. So the contribution on the agriculture and agro-industrial sector to the GDP of Ecuador is the 15%. However, just to mention some challenges, climate change poses a significant threat to their livelihoods. We have, for example, every year the phenomenon of El Niño. We face every single year, and it causes many problems for our agriculture. As you know, environmental crises not only jeopardize farmers' incomes, but also threaten biodiversity and other key sustainability goals in the agro-industry. So in that sense, we have been collaborating with some international organizations like FAO, UNCTAD, and other on projects that aim to reduce carbon emissions and improve farmers' incomes. Additionally, we are developing a national traceability platform through AgroCalidad, which is our phytosanitary a national agency, just to help register producers and meet international market requirements. However, exporters sometimes, so often, need extra certifications, for instance, requested by buyers, highlighting the importance of harmonized global standards. Just talking about incentives and policies, we recognize that some incentives can encourage unsustainable practices. So our goal is not just to remove them, but maybe to redesign them. Public support should reward innovation, soil conservation, and sustainable productivity. Standards and regulations also affect farmers directly. So globally, almost 88% of deforestation is linked to agriculture, with many small-scale farmers involved. In Ecuador, family farmers are vital for food security and rural life. Mandatory traceability standards help protect the environment, but also create financial burdens. These costs always hit small producer hardest. They already struggle with access to finance. Different standards across regions can increase costs and reduce market options. This is why international dialogue is important to harmonize approaches. So we need to evaluate the overall impact of regulations, ensuring that financial resources truly benefit the farmers most affected. Talking about cooperation is another key that we think is an important element. So we strongly always support international cooperation, of course, and the benefit from knowledge sharing, technology transfer, training, some pilot projects. These initiatives are often limited in scope and duration for our country, so we need broader strategies with real impact on the ground. So dialogue and cooperation help align sustainable development goals with trade policies while respecting each country's reality. And of course, we cannot forget about food security. For us, it's very important also along with nutrition. Trade policies should open markets to allow efficient production and distribution of safe, nutritious food. At the same time, countries must protect local production and avoid depending inequalities in access to food. For us, trade is a tool to achieve adequate and sustainable nutrition for all. So just two ideas to close my remarks. First, we believe sustainable agriculture means balance, which means protecting nature, ensuring food and nutrition security, and sustaining livelihoods through competitive, sustainable agribusiness. And second, this balance can only be achieved if we work together, producers and consumers, developing countries, sharing responsibility and building solutions through cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis, for presenting. It's a really comprehensive view of the challenges at hand, and also the idea of shared responsibility. And also thank you for emphasizing the significance of family farmers, particularly in your country, to food security and livelihoods in rural areas. So really useful. Pleased that we have your perspective on the panel. So now I'm going to move to Julio, please. I'm saying it incorrectly. Is it Julio or Julio?
Julio.
Julio,
Please,
sorry.
please. No, don't worry. My family is also half Spanish, but I'm Julio with G of Geneva. But I'm a victim of more famous Julio in the world. Now, in any case, Giulio is here to talk a bit about the position of the European Union, of 27 member states, with different variation of Giulio there. And I would say I may want to start indeed by the fact that, yes, we are both inside the European Union, we are a variety of member states, a variety of positions, different situations in terms of producing agriculture. It's a bit the same that we are confronting then in a larger symposium like the WTO. But we are all united, and you have a good representation here about the fact that recognizing that sustainable agriculture is playing a bigger role now. And if you ask the European Union, we always start a bit our line to take with an approach saying we should see the agricultural reform through the lenses of sustainability, and we add also food security. I would say food security is really part of sustainability and the sustainability debate. Through that lens, we could find solutions in all different chapters and pillars of the negotiation. No one is excluded. It's not a matter to put environment versus trade or trade versus environmental sustainability or etc. It's really to have a comprehensive debate, a bit like the one we had with fishing. Because we see that agricultural trade is a powerful lever in terms of a sustainable food system and ensuring global food security. But we have to avoid all the risks that we have in terms of either of environmental leakages or strain also of natural resources, because from once we also know that we are a big exporter of certain commodities, etc. Or we have member states that are super efficient producers of certain commodities and then serve our domestic markets. But recently we have seen how much their own resources, natural resources, were strained because they were too much efficient, they were producing too much. So it's also a debate, shall we really affect our environment in order to export somewhere else or to meet the need for proteins, for example, of other countries? And we have really to look into the landscape, so that was also referring by the business administrations. And if you want for example, trade agreements refers exactly to that. Is a work, they are really comprehensive trade agreement, covering in the case of agriculture, you have seen now what we are out now with Mercosur, is also a connection between agriculture productions, environmental protection, sustainability, how we deal with all of that in a coherent way to favor trade, but at the same time not affect the natural resources. We also insist very much on cooperation. Also, our trade agreements are regional agreements. More and more we promote regional agreements. We have the case of Mercosur, but also the one that we negotiate in Asia recently. There's really an effort in Africa. We really link trade with cooperation. So all our trade agreements are strongly linked to cooperation and sustainability. We in WTO insist very much about transparency. That is a key element. And so we noted a number of reflections that the intervenants have done on transparency. Transparency avoid indeed the fragmentations and the creation of a number of policies that may have negative effects, for example, on the environment. We have now a lot of focus on food security, especially after COVID, with all the economic and financial crisis that we have. So we have a number of members that now really are refocusing their policies, the amount of support they may have in order to favor also domestic production. This has to be done in a different way, and it's what we are working to now. In the meantime, where we suggest really to focus, agriculture has done already part of its work, and if you look to the green box requirements, etc., it's really an effort to look at not only supports have a negative effect on productions, but have a negative effect, avoid also negative effects is if it is well linked also to a number of conditionalities to the environment. So for us, linking those policies to green box and repurposing that in a different way will really help. Finally, I would like to conclude also on what we're saying, connecting the dots. Connecting the dots is important, but in order to avoid also those contradictions that Diego was referring, it is important that international organization works together. Sometimes in WTO, we have too much link to trade, and sometimes we are not really the one in charge of that. We are not in charge of agriculture policy definition per se. It's more FAO. Yes, we have responsibilities because we deal with subsidies, for example. But the better brains perhaps are somewhere else. And we have now this discussion about environmentally harmful subsidies and all the aspects linked to how to find the right algorithm, how to find the right trade-off, how to study that, how to have this granular things. Who can provide that is, for example, OECD. OECD, then once they reach certain conclusion, they have really to work on transparency with other organizations in order that is a bit shared. The same goes for the transparency on market that developed in G20, that by the way then is based in FAO, that we link with coming. We are all not only the European Union interested into forest preservation, we all sign the coming biodiversity and other deforestation. So it is also important to connect the dots of the work done by different international organizations and work together. Thank you.
And then what comments on, please prepare those. Over to you, Malito, please.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to begin by sincerely thanking the organizers for bringing us together for this important discussion. Personally, it is a privilege to share a few reflections in my personal capacity as a diplomat working on agriculture here in Geneva. When we speak about fostering sustainable agriculture, production, consumption, and trade, we must always remember the people at the center of this work, the farmers and rural communities, and around the world, and especially in countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change, such as the Philippines, where farmers face increasing risks from typhoons, floods, and droughts. Governments are making efforts to promote climate-resilient farming practices, to diversify production, and to protect food security. However, these efforts are not easy. So international cooperation plays a crucial role in providing farmers resources and technical support to make such measures more effective and sustainable. On the aspect of agricultural subsidies that are harmful to the environment, I believe we must acknowledge the dual challenge. On one hand, subsidies that distort trade reduce opportunities for producers in developing countries who struggle to compete fairly. On the other hand, some subsidies encourage unsustainable practices that can harm soil, water, and biodiversity. As emphasized by some of the panelists, I believe the task before us is not only to reduce harmful subsidies, but also to redirect resources in ways that promote innovation, adaptation, and sustainable rural development. While there is no negotiating mandate to discuss environmentally harmful subsidies in the WTO, encouragingly, international cooperation in this area may not be as difficult as it seems. As mentioned by some panelists this afternoon in their examples, today we have witnessed the official announcement of the entry into force of the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement, which the WTO itself considers a major step toward achieving Sustainable Development Goals 14.6. By doing so, we can ensure that support goes to building a stronger and greener future for farmers, rather than reinforcing practices that are harmful in the long term. On another key issue, which is ensuring coherence between development, trade, and environmental objectives, this is often the most difficult balance to strike. Policymakers must ensure that food is affordable, that rural communities have jobs and income, and at the same time respond to the urgent challenges of climate change In the Philippines, agricultural planning is beginning to bring climate and food security concerns together, showing how interconnected these issues are. At the international level, dialogue is essential so that sustainability, standards, and environmental measures support development goals instead of creating new obstacles to trade. On the matter of promoting food, nutrition, and livelihood security, the urgency cannot be overstated. Food insecurity is not only about producing enough food, it is also about whether people can access it, whether they can afford it, and whether food systems are resilient to shocks such as climate disasters or market disruptions. For countries like the Philippines, which experience frequent typhoons and droughts, these vulnerabilities are very real. This is why international cooperation is so important. By sharing knowledge, building capacity, and strengthening resilience, the global community can make a decisive contribution to food security. In conclusion, my main message is that trade development, and environmental goals must not be pursued separately. When they are aligned, they can reinforce and support one another. What is needed is inclusive, balanced, and practical cooperation that delivers real and lasting benefits for farmers, for rural communities, and for the environment. I thank you.
Agriculture discussion is as how do I say it, is facing the scale of challenge that Doaa may have put to us at the beginning, because I'm hearing here quite a lot of recognition about the importance of sustainability in agriculture as something that needs to be grappled with, different approaches to how that might best happen, but a lot of common streams across the discussion here. So I would say it's a very heartening discussion so far. I'm hoping that, I'm just listening to there's a lot of echoing themes. There may be those in the room who think we're on the wrong track altogether. That would be interesting to hear as well, but I think it's, I'm heartened at least by what I've heard so far. So hopefully, Aurora, you continue on this path. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. And thank you for the invitation. I think we're really pleased to join today. We welcome the broader discussion happening in Geneva. It is indeed a very important theme. I think sustainability is a key lens through which we should discuss agriculture and trade. You know, many mention, and obviously it's obvious, the climate emergency, the global food insecurity situation we're in, and international cooperation indeed is key to address it through, you know, the three pillars as well. Sustainability for us in the UK has been at the heart of UK transition. When we left the EU, particularly in England, we've been trying to find a way, guiding by our commitments to the WTO and the obligation through, for instance, a scheme that is called the Environment Land Management Scheme in England, where basically with a shift towards payments to farmers and land managers to protect the environment and promote sustainable food production. But outside this, sharing this domestic practice, I think colleagues have already, and thank you for the experts for their really enlightful presentation, and for colleagues from other delegations. I think they talked about policy coherence, transparency, subsidies as well. I think we thought that it might be useful just to highlight some of the key international cooperation that the UK has been involved in, with some members also present today and some international organization as well, that is helping international collaboration. I think the first one is in the lead up to COP26, the UK co-convened with the World Bank a global policy dialogue for sustainable agriculture. Very pleased that we have 30 countries, a participant from 30 countries, and this is about, you know, sharing evidence and also informing compendium of country case studies. I think many have already mentioned the importance of building understanding of each other challenges and practices and solutions that we're all designing. The second good example, I think, is the UK, Brazil, Africa climate smart Ag Research Partnership that we launched in 2023. This was part of the Global Food Security Summit that is with the view to promote research as well as scaling of climate smart agricultural practices. I think we're still in the pilot phase, but my understanding is that we have already 12 trilateral research projects going on, engaged across 1,500 of them in Brazil, in Ghana, in Nigeria, and in the UK. And then finally, I join others in welcoming today's entry into force of the agreement on fisheries subsidies, but also I'm pleased to announce that the UK and Brazil signed a partnership last Friday on fertilizer with the view to tackle their potential environmental impacts and embrace the opportunity around fertilizer trade in several areas, trade, research, innovation, knowledge transfer, which we think is going to be hopefully something we're really keen to explore with other countries and members who are here, as well as international organization here, to try to see whether there's a potential for further collaboration in this area, particularly regarding harmonized standards and accreditation for fertilizer products. So you were asking, what's the way forward? I think this is one of the partnership and example of international cooperation that is quite useful, and then some reflection on it more generally, and how international collaboration can help foster. I think the initiative can take time to set up. I think we need to be quite clear about that. And it's not just, in our view, it's not just about government to government approaches and initiatives. It's really about how do we make sure that all the stakeholders are involved and engaged in the discussion. So government, private sector, NGOs, think tanks, academia, international organizations, some of them are represented here, to try to tackle those challenges that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akhor, and also for taking hold of the question of where to next in terms of what can we learn about the types of international cooperation that are already being pursued and that could be built upon. So we have about just over 20 minutes left. I wanted to open up for some discussion. And I think what we'll do is, if people have reflections, really keep them just to 1 minute so that they're short. What I'll do is then gather some questions, and we offer opportunity for the speakers to respond to those. They may also have reactions to what each other has said, but there's no obligation on anyone to take the floor again who's a speaker. Just if you're moved to respond to the question at hand, you could do that. But I think the one question that I have, and I don't know if this is unwise as a moderator to do, but when I speak with many delegations here about the agreement on agriculture at the WTO, the response generally is, it's stuck, what a mess, what are we going to do? We keep on trying, nothing changes. The issues at hand remain just as urgent as they were for the countries that advocate progress on this issue. So it's not that there's a lack of wanting, but it's not really moving. So then the question for me is, how, in that context, could we, are there opportunities to reinvigorate, reinvent, revive, do something differently? Because there's such broad recognition among the majority of trading nations about the importance of sustainability for the agricultural sector from an economic and social point of view, as well as an environmental one. So it seems to me that people get it. So the question is, what kind of leadership or what is needed so that we can shift this a little bit in the WTO context? And I know this is a challenging time to be talking about anything to do with international cooperation or around multilateralism, but it's also a time for creative thinking, right? Or for new thinking. Not a lot is going to move in the next 6 months anyway, so one may as well step back and say, what are some of the opportunities here? So just as we have a brilliant bunch here today, and many of you have engaged in this subject for a long time, I think it's worth sort of stepping back and asking that question. And so so me, it's in the title. And when we came up with the title for this event, I said to Chris, I said, what I really want to know is, so what, how do we get there? And so that's why it's in the title. And so I'd be interested in your views on that. And also, I guess, where does the leadership come for this sort of shift in focus? So that's my question to those in the room, but you can ask your own questions also to the panelists or reflections on the discussion. I see Carolyn. Yes, please. maybe introduce yourself at the beginning so people know who you are, and then I see Ronald.
I'm Carolyn. I'm actually co-leader of a project called Agreement on Agriculture Reimagined, and I was really here to listen and learn, and it's been really interesting. Thanks so much for all the different points shared. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think, Carolyn, what you just said actually made it impossible not to. We have, it's an academic initiative, basically, and we've been, over 3 years, been given the liberty just to sit back and think and say, okay, if people like us in this room today were to, so I hadn't seen you, so Facundo Calvo is also involved in this initiative. But what we said to ourselves was, if people like us today were to sit back and we didn't have any constraints, no rules, and we really had food security, social sustainability, the kind of concerns we've heard today at the center, how would we design the international trading system? What would we regulate? How would we design it? What kind of institutions would we create? So we've been thinking about this for the past year and a half, and we've sort of come up with our draft model treaty that we'll be contacting many of you individually to get your feedback about. I thought that what we came up with was going to be quite off the wall, but I'm actually quite surprised and quite heartened to hear that it sort of coincides with a lot of being said today. So basically, the point I wanted to make is, perhaps if I could ask a question, based on your observation that things are not really moving in the WTO, where would I'm very interested in hearing, where would people turn to, and where do they feel leadership should come from? And maybe more specifically, should the entry point be through trade? Where we came to was to enter it through food security, sovereignty / right to foods approach, and then thought about the trade aspect. So yeah, just very curious to hear people's thoughts, sort of echoing your question, really. Thanks.
Yes, Ronald Steenblick from the Quaker United Nations office. Yeah, it was fascinating. Really liked the discussion. Normally I would be wanting to ask a question about subsidies, but I suppose it's more of an observation, though partly a question. And that is, I was hearing some subtle differences among the speakers about the question of if you want to call it the social dimension of farmers. And I was really happy to hear from Mr. Cabuños, I hope I pronounced the name right, when he, instead of talking about farmers, he talked about rural communities. And it made me think more broadly about that nowadays. I think that's the right perspective. If we're thinking only and looking at, well, is this policy maintaining the same number of farmers in agriculture? That's a pretty static way of going about things and looking at things. And if I think what Mr. Cabuño said was, well, we need to make sure that the rural communities themselves are sustainable. They have job opportunities, and they have enough to eat and have good services and so forth. But I think more broadly, we also need to recognize that agriculture is playing an intersecting with a whole lot of other issues nowadays. It's now there is a lot of siting of renewable energy on farms through solar panels, for example, or wind turbines. And I wonder what conditions is that a net positive, and what conditions are there some trade-offs in terms of environmental impact? And the other thing is that if we're talking about maintaining the productivity of land, one of the things one hardly ever hears anything about is the effect of urbanization on some of the most productive agricultural land in the world. I mean, where do cities tend to locate? They tend to locate near good agricultural land. And so that ties itself into the whole issue of transport, because the density and the shape of cities is very highly influenced by what kind of transport policies there are. And you see in the United States, with its car-dependent culture, that you have enormous urban sprawl. And where's that urban sprawl taking place but on prime agricultural land?
Thank you very much, Ronald. Really good reflection. I'd be interested to hear what some of the panelists have about this sort of nuance or distinction between supporting farmers versus supporting rural communities and how one thinks about that. Were there any other questions or reflections from those here? Antonin? Yes. And then I'll turn back to the speakers and we have 15 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm Antonin Vergès. I'm working for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, in Gland, Switzerland. Thank you very much for organizing frequently this type of discussion. Very, very insightful. My key takeaway today, and thank you very much, Emeline, is the idea you've put on the table. For a very long time, I was thinking about how to identify harmful types of support. But then you immediately realize that it depends on the type of production practice. But production practice and their impact are context dependent. You want to share land with nature or you want to spare land with nature, depending on the countries, depending on some regions within countries. So you really need to consider landscapes, as you demonstrated with the strawberry example in Spain. So I think what is really innovative, maybe a little bit naive, would be to manage to reconcile top rules coming from global agreements, trade agreements, with collective preference coming from collective deliberation, with people saying, okay, these are the 11 targets that we want to achieve, not only food security, but also some sustainability dimensions, social dimensions. We want this number of jobs in the agricultural sector. We want, this is the future we want, selecting some targets and variables. This would come from deliberation and showing the compatibility with the two, the bottom-up and the top-down approach. So this might procure an agenda for research, possibly, but maybe more modestly, I would be very interested in documenting existing cases where, so WBCSD has done this with a number of farmers. Does it exist elsewhere? What were the impacts? What do we know about that? To what extent is it compatible with some of the WTO rules? And not with the trade entry point, but with a, let's say, more bottom-up entry point, and see ultimately the compatibility with some trade rules. That I think really innovative way of framing maybe the issue. Thank you.
Very much, Antonin. So with that, I'm just going to turn back to our speakers and panelists. I might just do it in the same order. We have just over 10 minutes, so it gives everyone sort of a minute each, like a core takeaway or reflection that you have. It can be from what each other said, that either you thought was brilliantly wise or you thought deserved further work. But I think what would be great is if we can focus on the way forward side of this. So I will start with you, please, Pinar.
Thank you very much. I think I will, like, my main key takeaway from the discussion today and from the reflections is that I think it's important to focus on, not to focus on what is traded, how it is produced. And when it comes to how it is produced, it depends on the context of the country, it depends on its own abilities, infrastructure, etc. So building on that, what might be really important is like fostering dialogue amongst members, amongst countries, and also promoting the discussion based on evidence and information available. Because in FAO, we always say that we need to inform policy, to have informed policy decisions, we need to have more data, more evidence. So what I will say is that maybe the way forward might involve to have more conversation amongst relevant stakeholders, not only governments, but also academia, international organizations, research institutions, and to put forward some evidence and data in front of the countries. Now, I would like to take my hat as FAO expert. I want to kind of like wear my hat as a former negotiator of fisheries subsidies negotiations at the WTO. I think, because today lands a great achievement for WTO members on the WTO, because the agreement on fisheries subsidies enters into force. I know that the process, and the process was very challenging. It lasted around 20 years. I don't want to bring a conclusion saying that like finding solutions for agriculture will last 20 years. But I think what was important throughout the process was like to base discussions based on data, evidence, and information. So I will stop here and I will give the floor to other speakers.
Just going back to the question that, thank you very much, Pinar. Going back to the question that Carolyn had mentioned, I think one of the challenges here, and it's the challenge in so many international topics, but is this connecting the dot, for example, between, there's excellent work that goes on at the FAO, including around data and evidence, excellent work at the WTO, excellent work in the context of the CPD. The climate change regime also has a whole set of initiatives around sustainable agriculture. There's the FACT dialogue. Human rights system has various, commitments, declarations around the right to food and so on. But is piecing all of that together. So therefore, what in our small piece of the puzzle is how should the trading system or trade cooperation respond to that? Now, maybe it's not the right starting point, but it's a piece of that puzzle, right? But how to connect that is sort of one of those endless challenges, I think, of how best to coordinate. But I will not intervene anymore and turn to Doaa, please.
Thank you very much for this excellent and very thought-provoking discussion. I think on the way forward, I would point to an exercise that we launched several months ago together with the Geneva Trade Platform and CropLife International, a hackathon on international trade and food security, an international competition across all universities. The call for proposals was sent to all universities. 58 teams signed up. We have 3 finalists competing tomorrow at the WTO at 2 p.m. And I would urge you to all come, because as a way forward, not just on ag and sustainability, but on ag and food security and ag and WTO more generally, I think it was just breathtaking to see how creative students have been and how out of the box their thoughts have been relative to what goes on in the WTO, with students arguing and calling for corridors for the movement of grain, for AI information systems, for blockchain to track transactions, and things that go far beyond what we do in the WTO. And maybe some of that needs to come on board, including as a solution to sustainability. So do come tomorrow, 2 p.m., room S3, WTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Doaa. Christophe?
Thanks. Maybe just a few kind of reflections. I think Carolyn mentioned this idea that when we think about these issues, we should not look at it from a trade perspective, but maybe from a public policy objective, whether it's rural development, whether it's sustainability, and I think that's if you do that, it forces you to think about these issues in a different way. And I think Pinar mentioned the example of the fisheries subsidies agreement, and that's exactly what negotiators did there. I mean, really looking at subsidies from a completely different approach, looking at prohibiting subsidies to certain fishing practices like legal fishing, IUU fishing, prohibiting subsidies in certain circumstances when the stocks are already overfished, or in certain places, in unregulated high seas. It's completely new for the WTO. And I think if we want to do the same in agriculture, we will need to take that, maybe draw on these lessons and these precedents that are out there. And the second aspect, I think, answering your question, Carolyn, is what to do differently. I think we also need to start thinking differently in terms of what are the types of outcomes that we want to generate. Is it necessarily the kind of traditional WTO binding commitments with schedule of commitments, or can we be a bit more creative in terms of the type of outcome and results that we want out of these negotiations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Emeline, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think a question that everybody is asking themselves is actually centrally, indeed, is trade discussions and trade regulations the angle to take when it comes to sustainable agriculture? Is WTO the right place, right? And I'm not qualified to answer any of this. Definitely seeing a lot of the changes in tariffs and trade today, you wonder by which rules people are playing. And so we tend to see inspiring other examples. I would say, the action agendas that are being developed by the different COPs. This idea of the bioeconomy that Brazil is pushing, and the idea of finding ways to reward people and sectors and solutions that are contributing to nature preservation or carbon capture is really interesting. There's increasingly some discussions across the countries on that topic, China, Brazil, India as well. So we'd be interested to hear how we can use that momentum that is happening in other spheres. There is also the Food System Summit. We as the WBCSD were in Addis Ababa, where the second stocktake of the Food System Summit happened in July, where it's one of the attempts to really connect the different ministries, the different angles to looking at environmental, social, food, other components as well. So there is a lot bubbling out there in terms of some of solutions, and it would be interesting to see, to your question, what does it take? Which leadership is needed? And how are we able to piggyback on those discussions and some of the solutions that are being developed? Why not staying stuck in a system that everybody seems to be saying is stuck today? And maybe that inspires others for more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emeline. I'm getting a notice from our hosts that we have 5 minutes to go, which is good. We have 5 speakers. So if you each take 1 minute, then I get 1 minute, then we're only 1 minute overdue. Over to you, Diego, please.
Okay, thank you. I to respect my 1 minute. Two comments. I think that from Brazil's and my personal view is that discussion on sustainable ag should have a separate track from the reform process. I think if we try to bring those discussions to the COAS, we're gonna reduce even more the trust deficit that we have. But there is many spaces that we can use and make the most of. And the WTO, for instance, in the TESS-D, we are suggesting a discussion on bioeconomy in the context of environmental goods and services. There's the dialogue on sustainable ag that since June last year, Brazil has been offering a way for us to organize discussions there. And quickly, the social dimension, I liked what Ronald said about avoiding this static view. I think agriculture it will always be a diverse production system structures, but it should not be seen as this idyllic perspective of only a subsistence perspective and so on. Agriculture should be a way to transform people's lives, those people's involved in this activity. They should improve their lives through agriculture, and discussion on efficiency, productivity, sustainability should not be seen as a threat to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego, and thank you for highlighting some of the avenues within the WTO where you see that there's prospects for ongoing dialogue or cooperation on some of these issues. I have next, Luis, please.
Thank you, Caroline. We have discussed many issues today. We have touched like subsidies, standards, cooperation, food security, etc. That I think we need to discuss this as a whole. But in terms of time, I just would like to say something about the cooperation, because as I said, for us it's very important. It's very we value international cooperation, and sometimes we think that it's not, but it is too limited. So we think that we need broader, long-term strategies that really transform local realities. Our vision is always constructive, so we always we think that sustainable agriculture and trade should unite producers and consumers in the discussions and not divide them. Thank you.
Thank you for being beautifully brief as well. I'm going to talk now, Julio, please. Have to match his great record.
We do. Now, when we say that negotiations are stuck, perhaps negotiations are stuck, but trade is not stuck. Agriculture transformation are not stuck. It is exactly what the gentleman said. There is a need to update the negotiations with the needs of the markets. the need on the markets, the needs of the producer, the needs of any countries, etc. And I've seen that in our specific case of the European Union. Every 5 years, we have a new common agriculture policy, a new vision, etc. So we develop, we go further. For example, in the new vision, we have this connection between not only the production, but the environment, the economic and social aspects are clearly in, and connecting all those dots are essential. But the difficulties for me is how to connect that with the current discussion WTO. That is really, it's like to talk to my grandmother about what the grandchilds are doing. You know, this machine that you can touch here. It's different. It's a new reality that we have to say. So it's important that we have this update. For us, sustainability is the lens that we can see, is the kind of work that puts all us together. It's not a matter that to take it separate from one negotiation, is all negotiations should address sustainability. And then we connect the dots. But we cannot have an agricultural reform outside the sustainability. Sustainability, as always I repeat, is no more a matter of two freaky rich Europeans that want to eat the chocolate, fair trade, or eat bio, etc. It's climate change. It affects everybody. Now my Belgian producers now are learning from the Cuban producer how to plant corns in a way that the tropical storms do not crush everything when they plant. It's exactly the same problem that we have, and we have to address with new data. So we have also to share data, to share experience, etc. It's 20 years that we address conditionality of subsidies, for example, in European Union. Has it given certain results or not? We tend to say that each time that you promote data exchange or experience exchange is a way to block everything in WTO. No, it's a way really to have a new thinking. That is why also we had recently a retreat about sustainable agriculture to see how we connect the dots and we put all together in an harmonious way. Thank you.
Thank you. I just would like to focus my intervention on the issue that was raised earlier by our colleague here regarding whether environmentally harmful subsidies do exist. And for me, they do exist. And I don't have the data, but scientific literature is saying that subsidies contribute or the exacerbation of global warming, climate change, and the Philippines, by its geographical location, we are the recipient of typhoons now. Based on my experience in my childhood, typhoons now were more strong than when I was in elementary or high school. So for me, yeah, environmentally harmful subsidies do exist. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As others mentioned, I think including the FAO for us, experience sharing, evidence-based discussion will be key. We're clearly very committed to taking part of that exercise, and we've been trying to be active as well in the different WTO dialogues or discussion taking place to date, and will continue to do so. More join up with private sector, academia, and NGOs, as I previously mentioned, and we're really keen to see the draft treaty model, as well as the listening to the great ideas. I'm sure tomorrow at the Hackathon, I think we will all benefit from some fresh ideas as well to find a way and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurora. So it just comes to me now to move towards closing this panel. The first thing I want to do is thank all of our excellent speakers from governments, from the various IGOs and stakeholder organizations here for such a rich discussion today. I think we have all benefited from the exchange of views. My reflection, I'm not going to try to summarize, but my reflection is that it's very easy at this time to be very cynical and very negative about the opportunities for cooperation internationally and particularly multilaterally. My feeling is if we peel back a little bit, from what we see in the newspaper headlines, there are consistent and ongoing efforts of governments to find ways to cooperate on a set of extremely complex issues, and sustainability in agriculture is a really clear example of that. But what I've heard today is from a range of different perspectives, as people recognizing the complexity, being willing to address, identifying the need to connect dots, the need for relevant data, but all of that's about recognizing the need to find ways forward and to cooperate better on this topic. So I think that from my point of view, that's a good news story. The other good news from today is that in peeling back, there's also recognition of the need to be open to new ideas and different ways forward. A lot of the integrated approaches that many of you have been talking about, it's about recognizing that there's expertise beyond, there's stakeholders with different expertise that need to be brought into this academic experience. We have experience sharing among different countries as well. I think we've heard a lot. I mean, these are old words in international diplomacy: policy coherence, integrated approaches, shared interests, shared objectives, positive incentives. But I hear that these are things that countries and stakeholders are committed to in this space. So the question is, I guess for all of you, is to focus when you leave here on finding those ways forward to make those good intentions able to be played out in practice through international cooperation. And hopefully, I think we've heard that there are some places where we can continue to take these conversations forward in the multilateral trade context as well. So just before closing, I wanted to thank again my colleagues from the Geneva Trade Platform and my own colleagues at TESS for their efforts in bringing this roundtable together today. And also just wanted to highlight that on a similar theme, tomorrow we're having a roundtable on trade, sustainability and water as the world's most valuable resource. It's something we don't think about perhaps enough in the context of trade and traded products. And we're also having a session on trade, climate and net zero pathways with a focus on particular sectors and implications for developing countries. And one of those will be around agriculture. So I just wanted to mention those two, and also today, a paper that Christophe and I wrote on trade, the role of trade cooperation in supporting a sustainable bioeconomy came out. So just because that word came up, I thought must promote our work. So with that in mind, thank you all again for taking the time to join us. And we only are a few minutes after 5 o'clock. So thank you all again.